Hello, everybody. Hello, can you hear me? Yes, I know, I have to use my teacher voice in this room. Welcome, everybody. Hello and welcome to the first Alumni Chair in the Humanities, Public Humanities event of the 24-25 academic year. My name is Sam Dorff, and I'm the Alumni Endowed Chair in the Humanities here at the University of Dayton, and it is my absolute privilege to welcome you to this absolutely beautiful space, the Roger Glass Center for the Arts. Show of hands, how many people this is their first time in this space? I love it. How many people can't wait to come back to hear one of our ensembles perform here? Yes, great, I love it. Okay, so we are very glad to see you here tonight for this very important and very timely event. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. So Dr. William Trollinger is professor of history in the History and Religious Studies departments here at UD, where he's been since 1996. Quite some time. He earned his BA in English and History from Bethel College in Minnesota and his MA PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His research has focused on 20th and 21st century American Protestantism, particularly fundamentalism, young earth creationism, and the Christian right. His publications include God's Empire, William Bell Riley, and the Making of American Fundamentalism. The second and revised version of this will be published in 2026 by the University of Tennessee Press. And he's also co-authored with his fantastic wife, UD English faculty member, Professor Sue Trollinger, this really great book called Writing America at the Creation Museum, which was published by Johns Hopkins Press in 2016. The Russian translation of this book will appear in 2025. Most relevant for this evening's presentation, he's done a great deal of research on the Ku Klux Klan here in Ohio, and as an Ohio humanities speaker, has spoken on this topic in cities and towns across the state. In his article, Hearing the Silence, the University of Dayton, the Ku Klux Klan, and Catholic Universities and Colleges, which appeared in American Catholic Studies, that received the 2014 Catholic Press Award for Best Essay in a Scholarly Magazine. And we can now welcome Bill Trollinger.
Some good techno fun. Thank you. It's a great honor to be in this lovely space. Thanks to the University of Dayton for making this talk possible. In particular, thanks much to my friends Sam Dorff, who you just met, and Danielle Poe, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Thanks also to the Ohio Humanities Council, which, as Dr. Dorff noted, has sponsored in-person versions of a shorter presentation in towns from Marietta to Sandusky. I must also give a shout out to Jamie Small and other colleagues with whom I have the privilege of working in the Homeland Security Grant project to prevent radicalization to extremist violence in Southwest Ohio. Thanks also to the many colleagues here at UD and elsewhere, including UD English professor Susan Trollinger, who have had to endure innumerable conversations about the Ohio Ku Klux Klan. And talk about an appropriate locale tonight. We are just across the street, kitty corner, from where the Dayton Klan held their biggest rallies. Friday morning, September 21, 1923, what was the Montgomery County Fairgrounds was abuzz with activity, with robed Klansmen and Klanswomen putting up tents, setting up picnic tables piled with food, and placing a 100-foot-high cross wrapped in burlap and soaked in motor oil alongside Stewart Street. At 2 p.m., the speeches began, with local Klan leaders asserting their determination to ensure that the United States would remain a Christian nation run by 100% Americans. After dinner, the Klansmen headed out on a parade down Main Street through downtown Dayton to the Miami River and back again. Besides thousands of white-robed Klansmen, there were brightly robed Klan leaders on horseback, Klan bands, automobile floats, and an airplane flying overhead with a cross illuminated with white electric lights on the bottom of its fuselage. And if you look closely here, you can see there were thousands of cheering spectators along Main Street. Back at the fairgrounds, it was time for the naturalization ceremony, quote unquote, for prospective Klansmen. 15,000 Klansmen formed a ring around 7,000 kneeling initiates, you can see them here, while 10,000 spectators filled the stands. The ceremony included prayers and songs by the KKK Glee Club. The huge Stewart Street cross was set ablaze. The plane reappeared, but now the lights were red. The Grand Kleagle led the Klan wannabes in an oath in which they proclaimed their pure American nationality. After the lighting of large crosses on either side of the platform, you can see them here, the Kleagle welcomed the eager candidates into the Ku Klux Klan. This very long day then concluded with a fireworks show, which included aerial bombs exploding in the sky, as well as fiery displays that spelled out "without reproach and without fear." September 21, 1923. One of the most significant features of American life in the 1920s was the inescapable, powerful presence of what historians refer to as the Second Ku Klux Klan. The Second Klan is both connected to and distinct from the First Ku Klux Klan. The first KKK emerged in the South in the years after the Civil War, during the decade or so, 1865 to 75, known as Reconstruction. During these years, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were enacted, abolishing slavery, establishing that African Americans were citizens, and giving black males the right to vote. With federal troops present throughout the South, and with congressionally established Reconstruction Acts in place, the newly freed slaves could now move about freely, attend school, vote, and hold office. Given that for a few years, some former Confederate officials were not allowed to vote or hold office, the Republican Party, which unlike today was the party of the North, controlled many state legislatures, black legislators were elected, and state laws were passed that started to nudge the region toward racial equality. Reconstruction is this very brief moment in American history when one can imagine that, when it comes to race, it could have all gone differently. Alas, it was not to be. In the post-Civil War South, there was strong opposition to the end of white supremacy. One of the white resistance groups that emerged, and there were many actually, was the Ku Klux Klan. The goal of the Klan and similar groups was to terrorize African Americans into not exercising their newly won rights as American citizens. By whatever means necessary, these white Southerners were determined to regain their former dominance. And so they did. They succeeded because the vast majority of white Southerners wanted to return to white supremacy. They also succeeded because white Northerners did not have the commitment to protect black people. By the mid-1870s, the federal troops were gone. Southern whites were now free to reestablish white dominance and place African Americans into conditions as close to slavery as possible. And the term they used to describe this process was redemption. While the KKK disappeared, it had won. By 1900, Jim Crow segregation was in place, as well as voting laws that essentially ended black voting in the South. The 13th Amendment was still in force, barely, but the 14th and 15th Amendments were irrelevant in the region. The North, the federal government, the Supreme Court all happily went along with this. Not coincidentally, a new version of American history emerged at this time, in the South and in the North. And some of you here tonight were taught some version of this history. I was. This revisionist history was most dramatically portrayed in D.W. Griffith's 1915 cinematic masterpiece, Birth of a Nation. Based on Thomas Dixon's novel, The Klansman, Birth of a Nation tells this story. Slaves were happy workers. The Civil War was unnecessary. The North repressed the South after the war. Blacks in Southern state legislatures were thoroughly corrupt and incompetent. Rapacious black males roamed the land looking for white women to assault. Then enter the film's heroes, the Ku Klux Klan. They restore sexual order, capturing and lynching the prospective black rapist. They restore political order using military force to keep blacks from voting. And they restore religious order. The film ends weirdly with an image of Jesus blessing the redeemed South. There were protests against this film, led by African Americans and the newly organized NAACP. But lots of white Americans loved this film. This included the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, who had a private screening in the White House. Actually, Wilson was quoted in this silent film. The white men were roused by a mere instinct of self-preservation, and until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country. Another thrilled filmgoer was Colonel William Simmons. Colonel referred not to a military rank, but a position he held in the fraternal organization called Woodmen of the World. Colonel Simmons, he insisted on me calling Colonel. Colonel Simmons was inspired by Birth of a Nation to revive the Ku Klux Klan. Thanksgiving Day, 1915, Simmons and 14 friends went to the top of Stone Mountain in Georgia and lit a cross. The original Klan didn't burn crosses, actually, but the film had added this feature. They lit a cross to announce the founding of the second KKK, with Simmons as Imperial Wizard. Months later, a site of the mountain was donated to the United Daughters of the Confederacy for the carving of a huge Confederate memorial. This second Ku Klux Klan remained tiny for the next few years as the Great War raged in Europe. But after the war, in 1920, Colonel Simmons employed a marketing firm to promote his organization. The firm hired professional salesmen. In Klan lingo, they were called Kleagles, to recruit members. Driven by the fact that they got to keep $4 out of every $10 initiation fee, Kleagles aggressively and successfully targeted fraternal organizations and churches. Protestant ministers could join for free. Screenings of Birth of a Nation were used as recruiting events. And what the Kleagles had to offer prospective members was an exotically racist organization replete with dramatic ceremonies and trappings, flaming crosses, secret passwords, white robes, and colorful terms, claverns and conclaves and wizards. All of this was incredibly successful. The white-robed Klansmen and Klanswomen, there were indeed Klanswomen, and actually, this is a Klanswoman conclave just across the street, again, here in Dayton, 1923. The Klansmen and Klanswomen, with their fiery crosses and their fiery rhetoric, seemed to be everywhere in the first half of the 1920s. Just a few examples. Chicago had the largest number of Klan members. Historians have estimated that at its high point, 5 million Americans, 4% of the total population of the United States, were members of the Ku Klux Klan. Unlike the first KKK, the second KKK was a truly national organization with chapters from coast to coast. Indiana was the site of the Klan's greatest political achievements, with control of the governor's office and other state-level positions. And just a couple excellent books on the second KKK. Gordon's book's A National Look. Egan, the journalist, focuses on Indiana. Ohio may have had more Klan members than any other state in the Union, with 400,000 members at its peak. To quote one historian, during the 1920s, it seemed like the mask and hood had become the official symbol of the Buckeye State. Middletown, Bowling Green, Akron, Marietta, Lima and Springfield, and then Springfield. And then, speaking of Springfield, just last month, one reason the KKK was so appealing to so many Americans in the 1920s is that it presented itself as the supremely patriotic organization. The phrase they used over and over again was 100% American. And to be 100% American meant you were white and you were determined to oppress people of color. On the West Coast, Asian Americans were a primary target of hate. In the Southwest, the focus was on Latinos. And of course, in the South, the dominant emphasis was keeping black men and women in their place, the goal being to ensure that there was no challenge to white supremacy, no challenge to segregation and voting restrictions. The Southern version of the second KKK and their allies used extreme violence, including the lynchings of Black World War I veterans in their uniforms. They used violence in an effort to terrify blacks into submission. But to the Klan, to be 100% American didn't just mean you were white. It also meant that you were Christian. To put it succinctly, the KKK was and is the quintessential white Christian nationalist organization. Every conclave involved crosses everywhere, burning crosses, not burning crosses. Every Klan meeting house had an altar upon which a Bible was open to Romans 12, 1-2. Quote, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. When Klansmen were initiated into the organization, they sang the revival hymn, Just as I Am, without one plea. And Jesus was celebrated as the first Klansman. But to the 1920s Klan, to be 100% American did not just mean you were a white Christian. It meant you were a white Protestant Christian. In the years between 1890 and 1920, a flood of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe came to America, most of whom were Catholic or Jewish. In the eyes of the Klan, such immigrants were polluting America. As Colonel Simmons declared, quote, America is not a melting pot, it's a garbage can, and the Catholics and the Jews are the garbage, unquote. While the Klan was viciously anti-Semitic, conspiracy theories about Jews trying to control the world's finances was and still is standard fare for the Klan. There were so many more Catholic immigrants, and so the Second Klan focused much of its animus against Catholics. This was certainly the case with the Ohio KKK. The rhetorical attacks in the Klan newspapers published in Ohio, the Klan Courier and the Ohio Fiery Cross, were not subtle. Catholic schools were un-American and dangerous, a threat to public education, while also being breeding grounds for criminals. Quote, only 5% of our juvenile delinquents are graduates of public schools, while 65% of juvenile delinquents are graduates of parochial schools, unquote. Just a note, fabricating facts has always been a feature of hate groups. Worse, some of these schools allowed blacks to attend, thus promoting race mixing, described as, quote, Catholic mongrelization. Catholics were also weirdly accused of colluding with Jews to create movies that polluted the minds of unsuspecting white Protestants, unquote. Yes, Klansmen, Jewish money controls the movies, and the baleful influence of the papal hand is consequently felt through moviedom. Politically, Catholics were simply papal puppets, voting as they were told to vote. Quote, Romanism, through its priests, invades society and politics and commands obedience. It's the oldest and most relentless tyranny known to the human race, unquote. One of the main features of the Ohio Klan newspapers, and they used to be housed and they still may be at Wright State, one of the main features of the Ohio Klan newspapers was its monthly list of Klan rallies. Here is a small sample of Ohio cities and towns in 1923 and 1924 that hosted major rallies that attracted thousands or even tens of thousands of people. Bowling Green, Camden, Cincinnati, Coshocton, Dover, Findlay, Greenville, Hamilton, Hillsborough, Jefferson, Lima, Lisbon, Marion, New Philadelphia, Orrville, Painesville, Plain City, Sidney, Springfield, Urbana, Troy, Xenia, and Zanesville. As far as urban centers of Klan activity in Ohio, 2 cities were at the top of the list, Youngstown and Dayton. In fact, these 2 cities were in the top 6 in the nation in terms of highest percentage of residents who were Klan members. And if you're interested, the other 4 cities were Dallas, Denver, Portland, Oregon, and Indianapolis. In the 1920s, both Youngstown and Dayton had populations of around 150,000, and both cities had experienced an influx of large numbers of Catholic immigrants and smaller numbers of Jewish immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe to work in the factories. This influx of, quote, aliens bred a great deal of Protestant resentment. For purposes of time, I will hold on my comments about the Youngstown KKK. There it is. Except to say that if you're interested, see Bill Jenkins's Steel Valley Klan. As regards Dayton, in the early 1920s, state KKK officials privately estimated, and historians agree, that 15,000 Daytonians were members of the Klan. Given that the city's population was 152,000, then approximately 10% of the city population were Klansmen and Klanswomen. But 10% is a misleading figure. It's given that African Americans, Catholics, and Jews were ineligible to join the Dayton chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. If you take that into account, it turns out that almost out of every 5 Daytonians who was eligible to join the Klan in the 1920s did so. One thing to keep in mind as I keep going, of course the Dayton Klan hated African Americans and Jews. That's the Klan, all right? But while today 42% of Dayton's population is African American, in 1920 that percentage was 5.9%, and the percentage of Jews was around 3%. The 1920s KKK in Dayton was confident they could keep African Americans and Jews under their thumb. They were much more alarmed by the 1/3 of Dayton's population that was Catholic. The Klan's strength in Dayton was made visible by these huge Klan rallies, and there were lots of them. But there were also cross burnings. Newspaper articles and oral interviews reveal a Dayton illuminated by burning crosses in the 1920s. One woman who was a teenager in those years admitted, 7 decades later, that she was still spooked by the, quote, memory of crosses burning almost every night, unquote, near her home. Another woman reported that she was scared to death by the constant cross burnings in her working class neighborhood. And another Catholic resident of Dayton reported that the massive Klan parades through the city, this is just one of many, plus the burning crosses brought home to her that the threat, quote, threat of Klan violence was always there. The local chapter of the KKK focused many of its attacks on its Catholic university, the University of Dayton. It's not a coincidence that the main Klan rallies were held across the street. And before I proceed, I need to provide a little context about UD. It's important to keep in mind that, as documented by my colleague Heidi Gowder, In the 1920s and 1930s, the very few African American students at UD were restricted to taking evening classes. Moreover, in the very years that the Klan was terrorizing the University of Dayton, students were putting on blackface minstrel shows. And I thank Sam Dorff for pointing me to this. One would think that all this would mollify the Klan. But for the Second Klan, all of this was not enough. To be 100% American meant you were a white Protestant. And to the Ohio Klan, UD was the headquarters of Catholic subversion in Ohio, with a ROTC program that was training a Catholic army to fight religious wars against American Protestants. As elsewhere in Dayton, the primary means of intimidating UD was the burning of crosses. One student later recalled that, quote, it was the Klan's joy and delight to come out on the campus and burn a cross or two. But these Catholic targets of intimidation did not passively accept the Klan's harassment. When a burning cross was planted on campus, students would race out of their class or dorms to chase the Klansmen away, all the while calling on the cowards to, quote, show their faces. The Klan responded to such defeats by lighting crosses in Woodland Cemetery across from campus, as the cemetery fence gave the Klansmen some protection. On one occasion, UD football coach Harry Bojan learned that the Klan was en route to the cemetery to burn a cross. So, as he recounted in a later interview, he went to the dorms and called out all my big football players. Gathering them near the cemetery, he instructed the players to wait until the Klansmen got around that cross and started to light it. The cross ablaze, he exhorted his players to take off after them, tear their shirts off, anything else, whatever you want to do. But the Klansmen saw them coming. As Bojan lamented, we never got near any of them as they went so fast through that cemetery. But student resistance did not dampen the Klan's desire to intimidate Dayton's Catholic University. Wednesday, December 19, 1923, was the first day of Christmas break. By evening, fewer than 40 students were on campus. At 10:30, the calm was shattered by a series of explosions. Students leaped out of their beds and ran out into the night. Outside, they discovered that 12 bombs had been exploded throughout campus, but at some distance from university buildings. No one sustained serious injuries. Property damage was minimal. It could have been much worse, given that at least one bomb went off near buildings that stored ROTC guns and ammunition. But what caught the eyes of the frightened students shivering in the cold was a blazing 8-foot-high oil-soaked cross on the west edge of campus, near where the law school stands today. As the students ran toward the cross, they discovered the perpetrators waiting for them. Several hundred Klansmen had filled 40 to 50 cars, which they very slowly drove in single file, quote, quoting the Dayton Daily News, past the blazing emblem, all the while issuing a volley of threats at the students. But the tables soon turned. The detonations of the bomb, I'm reading from Dayton Daily News, the glare from the burning cross, the shouts of the invaders jolted hundreds of residents out of their houses. Angry at losing their sleep, the folks from the neighborhood, many or most of whom were Catholic, charged the hooded intruders, yelling their own threats as they approached the line of cars in front of the blazing cross. The alarmed Klansmen hit the gas and sped off into the night. This incident was the high point of Klan attacks on UD. There were no more bombings, but the Dayton Police Department never identified the bombers or brought them to justice. The Klan continued to burn crosses on or near campus, as well as hold large rallies at the fairgrounds. It was not until the late 1920s, when the Ohio Klan entered a precipitous decline, that the University of Dayton could begin to consider itself safe from terror administered by 100% Americans. In spring of 1996, I was hired as an associate professor here at UD. Late that summer, the University Provost, Father James Heft, who is here tonight, asked me to write a brief article on some aspect of Dayton's religious history to be distributed to folks attending a Thanksgiving celebration sponsored by the National Conference of Christians and Jews. It was a daunting assignment, given that I was brand new, I had very little time, and I knew nothing about Dayton's religious history. But he's the provost, so I said yes. But I did know, the one thing I knew is that the second KKK had been strong in Ohio. I knew that. So I turned my undergraduate American religious history class into a research seminar, giving each student the assignment of focusing on religion and religious conflict in Dayton in the 1920s. Through reading the Dayton Daily News, it did not take long for us to discover that the Klan was very active in Dayton and that UD had been a special target. We produced a pamphlet in time for the Thanksgiving conference. And then I kept researching the topic. And in that research, what surprised me most is that virtually no one I talked with at UD knew that the university had been the target of KKK attacks. There is absolutely no mention of the Klan in either the institutional history written in 1937, just 14 years after the bombing, or in the history published in 2000 for the school's 150th anniversary. More than this, the memory of Klan attacks seems not to have made it from one generation of UD students to the next. In response to a conference paper I gave on this topic, UD graduate Philip Gleason, who was in the audience, and historian extraordinaire, stood up and commented that as a UD student in the 1940s, he had never heard a word about all this. And in a 2012 campus discussion of UD's history, a longtime and respected member of the UD community stood up and flatly asserted that the Klan never burned a cross on campus, much less set off bombs. It was fiction. To underscore that UD forgot, quote unquote, its history, I returned to the story of Coach Bojan and his football players chasing the Klan out of Woodland Cemetery. The story becomes more dramatic when one realizes Bojan's place in Dayton's athletic history. Having played for Newt Rockne at Notre Dame and then in the brand new National Football League, Bojan came to UD in 1922 as an assistant coach, taking over as head coach in 1923. Over the next few decades, he created a stellar football program. Not only does the UD soccer field bear his name, but in 1990, he was posthumously inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. But despite Bojan's renown, I had heard nothing about him and his team's encounter with the Klan until I visited the university archives. There I discovered a transcript from a 1974 oral interview with Bojan and one of his players from the 1920s, in which the player prompted Bojan to tell the story I recounted earlier. How does an institution forget an exciting, even heroic story such as this? More to the point, why did the University of Dayton collectively fail to remember years of dramatic events that included cross burnings, a bombing, and multiple incidents of students confronting hooded invaders? I don't have a definitive answer to this question, but there are clues when one goes back to July 1920. When the Board of Trustees voted to change the school's name from St. Mary College to the University of Dayton, a decision that served to obscure the school's Catholic identity. In October 1920, President Father Joseph Tetzlaff published an article in the campus newspaper defending the board's decision to make this name change, in which he explained that the name change would bring home to the city of Dayton the remarkable educational work accomplished at the school, quote unquote, thus suggesting that city residents had not felt such pride about St. Mary College. Perhaps the most that can be said for Father Tetzlaff's explanation of the name change is that it was aspirational, in that he and the board hoped that the city would come to feel pride in its primary institution of higher education. But those hopes were dashed within a year of the name change, as a significant percentage of native-born Daytonians joined or supported the local KKK chapter, which had as one of its primary activities an anti-UD hate campaign. And while UD students were actively confronting Klansmen as they lived crosses on campus, UD's administration remained silent. As the school's VP admitted, The university's plan was to cope with the situation without seeking aid, quote unquote. Then came the December 1923 bombing. Silence was no longer an option. But in breaking the silence, it's telling what the administration said and did not say. Both President O'Reilly, who had become president that year, and Vice President Kunneke focused their comments on the threat to the ROTC arsenal on campus. Because the Klan was now threatening U.S. government property, its attacks on the university must be stopped. There doesn't seem to be any or much in the way of public comment from the president and vice president about the Klan's anti-Catholicism. In fact, the vice president went out of his way to say virtually nothing about the school's identity, observing only that, quote, students of all denominations attend the university. One plausible reading of the University of Dayton's almost instantaneous historical amnesia regarding the Klan harassment and attacks is that there was a sense of shame that a large portion of the community in whose name they had titled the university did not understand this Catholic school as truly American. Given the school's precarious standing in the community, why continue to bring attention to these incidents? The faster all of this could be forgotten, the faster UD could be assimilated into the Dayton community, the better. While I don't have time to go into this tonight, I must note that, having examined 23 institutional histories of Catholic colleges in northern and western states where the Klan was particularly active, it seems that other Catholic universities have had a similar historical amnesia about KKK harassment. The one exception is Notre Dame, which has celebrated the fact that its students took on the Klan in a 1924 confrontation in South Bend. I confess that I wish that we too would in some fashion take public note of the UD students who confronted the Klan. In the first half of the 1920s, the KKK was a huge presence in the state of Ohio and throughout the nation. The KKK peaked around the year 1925, the year of this incredible march in Washington, D.C. But over the next few years, the Klan suffered a precipitous decline in the U.S. and in Ohio. The organization was afflicted by a series of scandals, as not surprisingly, the Klan leadership was not necessarily made up of the best people. Most dramatically, the Grand Dragon of the Indiana Klan raped and murdered his secretary, and the subsequent trial helped reveal all the ways he had bribed and manipulated Indiana politicians. So by 1930, the second KKK had dwindled in numbers and influence. But before it faded, it achieved major victories. For one thing, in the South, the Klan helped ensure that white supremacy would remain the order of the day into the 1960s. More than this, the Klan won the day on immigration. Thanks in good part to Klan lobbying efforts and Klan congressmen, in 1924, Congress passed the Immigration Quota Act. This law, which remained relatively unchanged until the 1960s, established that each European nation had an annual immigration quota based on 2% of the number of foreign-born persons from that nation living in America in 1890, the year just before the influx of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, Catholic and Jewish Europe. To see how this worked, take, for example, Italy. In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, an average of 210,000 Italians a year entered the United States. Under the Immigration Quota Act, Italy's quota was now but 4,000 a year. And this fiery cross cartoon refers to those who were denied entrance to the United States as cast-offs, undesirables, rubbish. One of the tragic effects of this law came in the 30s and the 40s. As Nazi Germany established control over much of Southern and Eastern Europe, America refused to adjust the immigration quotas. As a result, it was very difficult for Jewish refugees to get into the United States, thus facilitating their eventual execution in Nazi death camps. While the second KKK faded in the late 20s, it did not die. A third KKK emerged in the 1950s and 1960s to lead the charge against the civil rights movement in the process of bringing back the Confederate flag, which had all but disappeared, as a symbol of white dominance. And now we have a fourth or fifth Klan. More than this, we now have a multiplicity of Klan-like organizations. White supremacy remains with us, to the point that over the past few years, white supremacists have been the #1 perpetrators of domestic extremist violence. The novelist William Faulkner had it right: the past is not dead, it's not even past. From the beginning in this country, we have had an ongoing conflict over who can truly be an American. On one side, we have those who argue that anyone can become American. Along with being able to speak basic English and having a rudimentary understanding of American history and government, one simply needs to affirm their loyalty to the ideas and ideals articulated in the Constitution. That's one side. On the other side, we have those in this country who argue that to be truly and fully American, 100% American as it were, one needs to be the right race, the right ethnicity, the right religion, the right gender orientation. The 1920s Ku Klux Klan held this view. A century later, it's not clear whether the Klan is, on the winning or losing side of the argument over what it means to be an American. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill Trollinger. As we reset the stage for our panel, I'd like to make a couple thank yous. So a number of individuals need to be called out who've made this event so successful and made it happen. First, our brand new, amazing administrative assistant, Lily Elliott, who's somewhere. She's in the back. Applause to Lily, who's taking care of so many of the really important logistics for this event. Kira Smith, the director of this beautiful facility, and her amazing staff who are putting up chairs now, who clean this building, who take good care of it. Huge thanks to them, as well as the team at University Catering, who is providing food for our reception. Huge thank you to them. I also want to give you just a thank you to the number of people from so many different walks of life, from so many different professions, particularly the elected officials. I know Andrea White, one of our state reps, is here. We have representatives from Oakwood City Council, from Dayton City Council, from the County Commissioner's Office. It means so much to the university that our elected officials understand the importance of this talk, but also the importance of the humanities, which is telling our stories as humans. So a huge thank you to them. And I'd be remiss if I didn't put up a QR code. So if you found this entertaining so far and you want to know about more public humanities events that the Alumni Chair's office is doing, I'm going to leave this slide up. You can pull out your magic little phone. You can take a photo of this QR code and you can be added to our email list. I promise we'll probably email you maybe once or twice a year. But feel free to use this QR code to join our mailing list. I'd now like to introduce the moderator of our panel, Dr. Natalie Hudson. She's professor of political science and a research professor of law at the University of Dayton, where she also serves as the executive director of our Human Rights Center. She teaches and conducts research across a range of topics in global gender issues, the politics of human rights, human security, international organizations, and transnational advocacy. Her book, Gender, Human Security and the UN, Security Language as a Political Framework for Women, published by Routledge in 2009, examines the organizational dynamics of women's activism in the United Nations system and how women have come to embrace and been impacted by the security discourse in their work for rights and equality. She's co-author of Global Politics by Oxford University Press, published in 2019, and then second edition in 2024, and numerous articles appearing in journals such as World Development, International Studies Quarterly, Global Change, Peace and Security. Her current book project is titled Stopping Rape in Conflict, From Advocacy to Awareness and Action. Co-authored with Alexandra Budabin, this research examines the uneven impacts of transnational advocacy on conflict-related sexual violence by closely scrutinizing the power dynamics across northern and southern actors, the circulation of multiple narratives, and gender constraints on access and storytelling, which is so key to the humanities, but also to the international human rights work that is done in that office. So please join me in welcoming Natalie, who will introduce our panel.
Well, good evening, and thank you, everyone. Thank you especially to Sam Dorf for putting on such a fabulous event, and for Dr. Bill Trollinger for really providing us with some provocative, striking, relevant, and the list could go on, ideas, thoughts, and history for conversation. And thanks to all of you for taking time out of your evening to be here tonight. It says a lot about our community, and given such a heavy topic, seeing all you in the audience is actually quite hopeful for me. I'm pleased to welcome three panelists and activists in our community who are going to speak to us tonight about their experiences working with organizations that are fighting hate and hate very locally. The first is Kelly Fishman. Kelly is the Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League's Cleveland office, covering Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Western Pennsylvania. Kelly began her career in higher education administration at the University of Miami, Florida, University of Michigan, and Case Western Reserve University. After completing her master's degree in education, Kelly worked for over a decade as a high school English teacher, club advisor, and diversity, equity, and inclusion lead at Solon High School. Kelly joined ADL in June of 2022 as the education director. In March of 2023, she moved into the regional director role. In addition to her work at ADL, she is also currently completing her Doctor of Education degree in Diversity and Equity in Education through the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and has co-written a freshman DEI textbook at West Virginia University. So please help me in welcoming Kelly. We're glad you're back in Ohio. Our second panelist is David Whitehead. David is a sales manager and regional political liaison for Spectrum Reach and is the owner of David C.S. Whitehead Tax Service, LLC. Most importantly for our purposes tonight, he is extensively involved in the community and currently serves as the second vice president of the Cincinnati NAACP, where he chairs the voter empowerment and political action committees for both the branch and the state of Ohio. So important right now. In addition, he is co-chairman of Voter Awareness for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, Valley of Ohio, assistant with the Desert of Ohio, and class of 2023 Grand Inspector General in the AASR United Supreme Council Northern Jurisdiction. He is also one of the founding facilitators of Helping Children Cope with Divorce program in Hamilton County, where he has spent 12 years assisting parents in learning how to co-parent post-separation. David attended both Cumberland College and the University of Cincinnati to earn his bachelor's degree in business administration. Please help me in welcoming David. Last but certainly not least, I welcome Father Satish Joseph, who was ordained in India in 1994. He has served the Archdiocese of Cincinnati for over 14 years. He has a master's in communication and a doctorate in theology from the University of Dayton. He is presently pastor of the Bread of Life family of parishes. That's 5 parishes, St. Anthony, St. Helen, Holy Angels, Immaculate Conception, and St. Mary here in Dayton. He is also the moderator of the Hispanic Ministry in the Dayton area. He is co-founder of Misa S Ministries and uses social media extensively for evangelization. He is also the founder of Mercy Pets, a charitable fund that invites pet owners to donate a % of their pet expenses to alleviate child hunger. Please help me in welcoming Father Satish. So I'm going to move over with the panelists. We have a microphone up here, good? Yeah. I could be loud too. Okay, welcome. The plan for the next 20 to 30 minutes before we hit the reception is to have a conversation with these folks who are on the front lines of many of these issues and dealing with many of these challenges in their own communities. And so I have a few questions, but I will try to provide some time at the end for you all to ask some questions. So please, if you have questions, hold on to those. We'll try to get to you. So, as we listened to Bill Trollinger speak, there was a lot of gasp, right? I think for some of us in the audience, a lot of surprise about what happened here in Dayton not that long ago. But I imagine for you, there were maybe as many surprises. And so, my first question for you is around thinking about this historical context that was outlined by Dr. Trollinger. What do you see as the core drivers of hate and violence in our community today, and how do those compare with perhaps the drivers that Dr. Trollinger presented? How similar, how different? What are you seeing in the spaces in which you work? And maybe we'll start with Kelly and just kind of work our way across. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I would say we don't really see very many differences between what Dr. Trollinger was talking about and now. So some of the images that you saw at the very end, Patriot Front, which happened to very, very recently march through Springfield. Blood Tribe, which was one of the images as well, also marched in Springfield recently, and one of their members was at the Springfield City Council meeting. And right now their big driver is Haitian immigrants in Springfield. And so many of the issues that we were seeing in the 1920s are still very relevant today. The idea that these groups believe that to be a real American, you have to be white, you have to be born here, that you're Christian, that you fit this white normative identity. And this very heteronormative identity, right? That if you are born with female parts, you identify as female. And so they believe in these very kind of antiquated ideologies. And we're still seeing that today. And we're still seeing these same groups subjugate people on the margins. And so they believe in this white supremacist ideology that they are the best. The interesting thing that we see now is that they want to make their numbers seem much larger than they are. So a lot of the images from the 1920s where there are thousands and thousands of Ku Klux Klan members, they use social media and they use AI to create images that make it seem like there are so many more members present than there actually are. And so I think the biggest thing today that we're combating is the use of social media and AI, generative AI, to create differences that sell a different story online than what we're seeing happen, play out in real time.
Thank you. Certainly the power of stories is a continuum, right? I was struck by the reference to the film and the role that the media in the 1920s played and the role that media today plays.
So that's a very interesting take that you did in regards to the media, being that I'm from the media. Mm-hmm. So I actually understand that from both aspects as an advocate in the civil rights, as well as someone that actually deals in media and the data that's involved. What really struck me is I didn't know if we were talking about 1920 or Wednesday, because it is so much of this is happening right now. There's an agenda of misinformation and disinformation that is being projected out that is fueling this hate. Hate is something that has so many different measures of why people hate. Economic issues are why people tend to hate. They feel like someone's taking something from them. So with that being projected out in the media as if we're in a bad economic and down time, people are gravitating to who is taking this from me. There are now people coming into the country that want to have a chance for opportunity. So now I need to hate them because they're taking something from me, when they're not taking anything from people, but there's the perception that they are. So hate has so many different forms when you're talking about people want to be included. I want to be in this group. So if this group is over here hating, and it looks as if that is something that matches where I want to be and how I want to be, then I'm going to hate along with them. And it's the same thing that were happening in the 20s, because if we think about it, stock market crashing, everybody was looking at poverty, and there was a lot of money being lost at the time. So now we fast forward here, we're looking at the same type of things where people are scared about how they're going to pay for their groceries. So now I push that to you so that now you hate somebody because they caused you to have these problems. Not that you didn't go to school, not that you're not going to work, not that you're not doing these things that you need to do. You're using that opportunity to pull them in. And that's what they're doing. There's a lot of that happening. And I just have one last thing that I want to point out in regards to this is it hasn't changed. It just took a different form. So now there's not the sheets and the clothes, there's the robes in the judicial system. There's the legislators that are now projecting things that are not positive towards inclusive excellence. So it hasn't gone. It's very similar. I can't see a lot of the change other than the fact that there's people in here that want to listen. And there's people that were on that football field, that coach is who I'm looking for. That coach is the advocate I need, because he probably, during that time, him and his players represented that the same look that the people that were hating. And that's who is going to be the trusted messenger to take the message that we're not going to stand for.
Thank you. Father Satish?
I was really moved by Dr. Trollinger's sharing on the UD and the KKK history. This is new to me, and it spoke to me because Immaculate Conception Church, where I live, the campus. If you have ever visited the campus, there is a rather large shrine to Mary. And around Mary's statues, there are about 6 other statues, and one of them is Pope Pius XII, and he's the one who declared the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. Now that shrine, that parish was built in 1938. The shrine was built in 1958. And from the day that shrine has been built, it has been vandalized. And today it clicked in my head that, yeah, what happened at UD was in the 1920s, but that anti-Catholicism from people who would call the nativists continued into the later decades. And in 1958, Pope Pius's statue was completely covered with tar. They had to clean that all up, and that has continued. The vandalization has continued, so much so that now we have put up a fence around it. These days, it's punk kids who are doing it, but the punk kids who probably are fueled by some of the same stuff, but it's also because some of these punk kids saw me as a non-white American there. Kids who will come in the night, create ruckus, and you say something to them, they'll respond to you in an Indian accent. More recently, both the 2 parishes that I have, St. Mary's and Immaculate Conception, have the largest Hispanic populations. We actually have Spanish masses, and I, in 2018, went and spent time in El Paso to have a experience of the entire immigration issue. And I came back and I had a rather large gathering in the church trying to get our parishioners to understand my experience of immigration and what happens at the border. And fortunately or unfortunately, Channel 7 was present, and it was on TV that particular night for news. And the next day, this is the call that was in my voicemail.
September 27th, 2018 at 11:51 a.m.
Why don't you go back to India? You're a disgrace to the United States. People like you don't belong here. Goodbye.
That's the shorter message I played for you. Before this was another message and it's the immigration issue again. It really touched me today that the whole immigration issue is being replayed today. And while it may not be specifically the KKK, but 1920s is being replayed in so many ways. Black people have their issues. We brown people have a different set of issues, which probably there needs to be some writing about people who are not born here and are people of color and face a very different kind of violence, both in words and in actions. I at least the question was, what do you see the drivers of hate? Anybody who works with immigration will be the object of hate today. And I am right in the midst of our immigrant brothers and sisters coming from the South. I am the pastor. I say Mass. I preach justice. I preach equality. And so I experience much of this kind of hate speech.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask a little bit about your daily work, right? Whether it's ADL, NAACP, or in your church. There are lots of challenges, and we don't have all night. I'm sure you could tell us about things that would take us well into the evening. But if you could reflect on one of your biggest challenges in your work today, and what is that challenge, and what are the strategies that you employ to address that particular challenge? What is working, and maybe you don't know how it's working, but maybe we'll start with you, David.
Well, real quickly, the biggest challenge is trying to communicate and listen to people at the same time, because a lot of times people are in their emotional feelings and not looking at what really the situation is. So one of the things that we employ is to make sure that we're listening and we're good listeners and allow people to vent out what their issues are that may not really be a race-related issue, may not be a hate-related issue. It just may be that something happened to them. And, being compassionate and empathetic in regards to what happened to them, and then trying to redirect them to the right advocacy group or resources to help them with their situation. You always get the people that call and blow up the phone saying they've been stopped by the police and it was a racial issue. And it turns out that they were doing 35 miles an hour over the speed limit. But understanding that just because the police officer stopped you, it wasn't a racial issue. It was you that committed the crime or committed the violation. So there's a lot of that happens. There's a lot of things where, we try and educate people in regards to legislation and who are the different components that affect their lives. Those are the huge things. People don't understand the three branches of government. They don't understand that they just think the president, the executive branch, and don't think about the legislative or the judicial branch and how it trickles all the way down to the local level. So it's a lot of educating people, getting out to forums like this and making sure we're talking with people, making sure we're building an alliance with different allies that are out there that can help affect change in the community. And that was long, my bad.
No, that was perfect. I think listening, especially to those that we don't agree with, is increasingly difficult, but increasingly important. So I appreciate that. Father Satish, a challenge, I know there are many.
Well, for me as a Catholic priest, we Catholics don't really have the best reputation for anti-racism work. Clearly, the Catholic Church failed the African American community post-Civil War and even later. But to preach about racism from the pulpit, it is a challenge. Yes, I have a captive audience, but it's hard to preach about racism from the pulpit because you can lose parishioners. And when you lose parishioners, you lose income that comes, and that affects the salaries of it's not just about the money, it's about a whole system that is kept by a group of people that are part of your parish. So one of the challenges is, and I have to admit, I used to be bolder before. I have not given up my stance, but I'm sensitive to who might walk out when I'm preaching about racism, or who will not come back to my church again, or who will not, or what kind of an email I will get, or what kind of a message will be left on my phone, what kind of a letter will the Archbishop get. These are all things, and I wish I could say that I felt backed up all the time, and sometimes I don't. So that's the challenge. The challenge is to work for immigration. Sometimes you don't necessarily preach, but the fact that you move around with a certain group of people itself speaks louder than words. The biggest experience I have in terms of the daily work, how do you come back? I have plenty of stories to tell you, but one of the very clear things is if a white older priest says something and I say the same thing, people will respond to the old whiter priest very differently. They will respond to a brown, I'm not young anymore, but middle-aged priest. It's just different. And I've seen this because I've worked with both. The same people will respond to the same situation, and they are bolder to say to me things that they otherwise would not say to a white older priest. People will say nasty things because they can do that to a person who's of color. So anyway, those are my challenges.
Thank you. One of the things that strikes me about what you said and connects back to David's point is how, and this connects also to our Marianist identity, is how do we keep people at the table, right? How do you keep engaging? How do you keep people from leaving the room and communicating and listening? And I think that's one of our biggest challenges. Kelly.
Oh, wow, there are so many challenges. A lot of people don't know ADL's mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all. So, for all. Regardless of who you are, we got you all covered in this room. But I would say one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now, post-October 7th with the attack on Israel, is the just massive spike in anti-Semitism. We do an audit of anti-Semitic incidents every year, and in Ohio alone, we saw a 240% increase in anti-Semitic incidents from 2022 to 2023. And we're really seeing that impact college campuses. And it goes back to that idea of this conversation of dialogue, and David and I were chatting about this before the program started, is that so rarely are people willing to really sit down and listen, to acknowledge that there is pain and trauma on all these different sides of an issue. It's not black and white, right? There are so many perspectives, and there is real pain and trauma that people come to the table with. And it's so important to be able to really hear where someone else is coming from. And I think one of the best ways to do that is through, I'm a former educator, so I think education, but teaching people how to have conscientious conversations. We are losing that ability in a world of social media where you can say whatever you want behind a screen, and then people feel emboldened to say whatever they want on your voicemail or to your face. And so one of the things that I think helps combat that is education around how do we have conscientious conversations and allyship. As a white person, I have the privilege to say things and do things that maybe some of my colleagues here on this panel don't have. And so how do I use the privileges I do have to be an ally for all those people that don't have those same privileges for me? However, my male identifying colleagues have male privilege that I do not. And so how can they step into spaces for me with that privilege? And so that's something every single one of us in this room can do, is use the privileged parts of our identity to stand up and support others, to really listen and give them space to share their experiences and hear them, and know that their experiences may not be our own, but how can I help support them to create equitable spaces in our communities?
Great, thanks. I do have some other questions, but I also am conscious of time, and I want to give our audience a minute or an opportunity to ask a question or two. If there are folks, Sam is there and can run around with the microphone. If there are questions, we'll invite Dr. Trollinger to come back up.
I will
so
run to you with
obliged.
the microphone. This is my favorite thing to do in class, too. But
Oh,
we don't
good.
get microphones in my music classes, yeah. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand. Oh.
Hey there. So I'm actually visiting Dayton, so this is new to me. And I guess my question is, how are we reaching across to those people that hate all those things, right? How are we building bridges? Because I think the hard part is people who hate, there's a certain element of loneliness and possibly tribalism in trying to protect who they perceive they are. And I don't know, it seems that even here in Dayton, community is fractured. And whether it's social media or redlining or whatnot, that's in every city. What's being done here in Dayton and in the Midwest?
Start?
That's a wonderful question. Thank you so much. I think we've got a couple different groups of people we're working with. People who are extreme white nationalists, white extremists. There are some of them that me sitting down and having a conversation with them is, one, probably not going to happen, and two, not going to get us anywhere. I think the bigger picture is, how do we have conversations with the other people around us? Because those white extremists and white nationalists, there are fewer of them. And so how do we use our voices to, again, to create those equitable spaces to really hear the people in our communities, right? And I think that's the disconnect we have, especially when I work with people in the outer suburbs of Columbus. It's been interesting. There's been a huge influx of opportunity that's come in, and so there are all these companies now, and they haven't had enough people to keep up with the job demand. And so all these people are moving in from all over the world, all over the US, and it shocked people, right? It feels like an assault on their community, right? All these new people are here now, and they're taking our jobs. There were so many jobs they couldn't even fill them. And they're changing the landscape of our spaces. And I think a lot of that is rooted in fear, right? It's the back in my day kind of attitude. And how do we change our perspective about that? How do we really learn about the people in our communities and have conversations? And we ourselves have to be open to that. And it's important that we don't become defensive when we engage in those conversations. So part of it is also recognizing, am I in a space where I can have this conversation? Because if I know I'm going to get defensive, then it's not a place where I should be entering. But if I can be open to hearing this person's story and understanding where they're coming from, now I have an opportunity to really build community.
And I'll just touch a little bit more on that. When I was talking about earlier about listening, being willing to listen, because I take the calls that come in that are the racially charged calls like he got. I'm the guy that calls back. You don't leave a message with me and there's a caller ID, and I'm going to call back. And then I'm going to ask you how I can help you. And then you can give me all the banter you want to, and I'm still going to ask you, but how can I help you? There's something I can do for you. Because to your point, that person out there is starting to be isolated. They're lonely. So they want to be a part of something. And you give them the door, you open up that door, you can break down a barrier one person at a time. And if you represent or look just like that person, you can be the communicator to bring them along. So that is just listening. You have to be willing to listen and not absorb it. You can call me anything you want to over the phone. But just want to point that out now. I'm still a man. So, but no, clearly just being willing to listen, let them, and then ask them how you can help them. If you keep asking people how you can help them, that breaks them down. Like, I'm saying all these vicious things to this person, he still wants to help me. And I have people now that I work with now that I know were probably were out there with the cross burning. But they now understand that I can bring something to them. I can help them. And it works.
Thank you.
My own personal effort has been to be very responsible in the use of my own social media, whether it's on X or Threads, that you don't continue the same hate. But my domain is particularly the worship space. And so since we have a very diverse community, so I have Rwandan people, a lot of Rwandan folks at Immaculate Conception in particular, and at St. Mary's, and I've created these bilingual masses. People come together to worship, and you're in God's presence as multicultural, and we make sure that the translation is available for everything that is, to intentionally create spaces to bring people together. I may not always have the conversation, but at the end of it all, you distribute tamales, and guess what? Americans love tamales. White people love tamales. So anyway, my domain is the worship space, and my effort is that space has got to be a place where everybody can come together, and there is a place for everybody at the table.
I think we might have time for one very, very quick question, because we do have a reception. There is food waiting for you outside, so I'm going to pass the mic. If you can help me hand this to.
But are there tamales?
We don't have tamales at this event.
I want to ask this group, how much do you think our current climate of political discourse fuels the hate groups? Because it seems to me that there's been a rise of those now that political discourse temperatures have really gone up in the last decade.
You know, I want to say, thank God it's out there. I would rather that it be out than people not. The discourse has brought, people have emboldened people to express what they would not say before. And I would rather that you say it than not say it and I don't know where I stand with you. At least now I know where I stand with people. So maybe this discourse is helping America to speak to one another. I hope we get to speak to one another, speak with one another. At least that's how I feel. Thank God I know who's who, so that I know how to conduct myself.
Absolutely. That is my whole realm of, first off, nonpartisan here, nonpartisan organization, so we don't take sides. But it is clear that there is a very big divide with the political arenas. And there's a lot of discourse that comes through the political channels. I actually send commercials out that I know, oh, this is terrible. But I am obligated by law in order to play them until somebody says, hey, you have to pull that off. So.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as a 501c3. We are nonpartisan. But I do think that we've seen a real increase in very intense rhetoric. And I think that's why our elected officials, whether we are talking school board all the way up through the President of the United States, every single one of those elected officials has a responsibility to their communities. And so I'm thankful for the elected officials that are here, that create these educational opportunities for themselves, who want to learn more about the people in their communities and the issues that they're facing. And I think, you know, to your point, it shows us what people really believe and what they're willing to stand for, and that makes it very easy for us to know who we want to vote for. And so I think it's important to especially empower young people to get out there and vote, to understand the importance of that obligation, because we really do hold that power to see, okay, well, here's where these people very firmly stand in their intense rhetoric. Now I know who I want to vote for and who I want. Like I said, whether it's sitting on school board or the President of the United States, every single one of those races matters. And so it is vital that we are using our voices to really make a change, and that our votes do matter. And I think, that this is the time to really make sure everyone understands how important that is and what a privilege it is to have that ability to vote for our leaders.
There's no question from my perspective that the polarized rhetoric has produced hate and intensified hate. There's no question about that. That said, as someone who studies white Christian nationalism, I'm also struck at times when I'm reading material, somebody here said it already, that or a number of you have said it, that there's this loneliness, there's this sadness. And so I guess my comment in this regard is attending to that really does matter. It's easy to read some of this awful stuff and to dehumanize the people who are speaking it. But the reality is that some of these people are in pain. It doesn't justify the rhetoric. It doesn't justify the results. It doesn't justify the white supremacist violence. I'm not doing that at all. But I am saying that there's a lot of pain and a lot of fear, especially among those who feel like they are losing out. That said, it still doesn't justify the hate.
Okay, well, we are going to wrap. I know we could continue the conversation, and we'll do so at the reception outside. Before we do that, I want to make one quick plug for those of you that are interested in continuing this conversation. Our Prevents OH work, which is work aimed at education around preventing violent extremism, is hosting a book club through the Dayton Metro Library. And the title of that series is Big Ideas for Defending Democracy. There are free books involved, so check it out at the Dayton Metro Library website. That work is through Prevents OH and through the Human Rights Center here at the University of Dayton. Please help me in thanking our distinguished panelists once again.
And we can't wait to continue the conversation in the beautiful Roger Glass Center lobby over refreshments. Thank you so much.